In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
A very warm welcome to you from Pakhuis de Zwijger. My name is Jurgen Chonafong and I will be your moderator this afternoon for the 7th edition of WeMakeThe.City Reset according to Marleen Stikker. As we experienced the past couple of weeks, the world is turned upside down. The streets are empty, but behind the seeming tranquility there's a storm raging through our values and structures. This does give us the space to think about a complete reset. How can we restructure existing dysfunctional systems? Well, in this new series, we will showcase the perspectives of a variety of thinkers. They will reflect on this present-day situation, and they will do that through the lens of their own area of expertise, but with an emphasis on the creative industry. Today, our main guest is Marleen Stikker, and later in the program, she will be joined by Sander van der Waal. If you are joining us through Zoom, it's a possibility as well to contribute to our conversation by posing questions through our Q&A functions. And there you can have a chat with other viewers as well through the chat function. Let's go to our main guest. As we know, internet pioneer Marleen Stikker founded the Digitale Stad, the digital city, which is the first virtual community introducing free public access to the internet in Amsterdam. And today she leads the Waag, which she founded as well. Marleen, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Really well.
You need to use the microphone so we can hear you, hear you at home as well.
No, I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Even in these dire situations where we, are experiencing a crisis which is being lifted a little bit right now, how have you experienced the past couple of weeks?
Contemplation, a lot of connections, a lot of conference calls, have been very busy. And we see this whole uprise also of Black Lives Matters, which is quite dense, and a lot of energy coming from that as well. There's change in the air, but there's also a lot of threat of governments that try to keep control, also through technology. So I think it's a mixed bag. It's both the feeling that some stuff can happen and we can move into another level. Right. And on the other hand, I feel also all kind of strength and powers that try to console it. Yeah.
Right. There is momentum. There is talk about change. Do you still believe that we are able to change the dysfunctional systems I mentioned before? Or are we, running back to our own habits before we know it? What is your expectation?
Well, yes, I think it's possible. I always believe it's possible because that gives me energy. And if I wouldn't believe it's possible, then why are you on Earth? So I think it's no. I think I think we are at a moment that we can't go back. It's clear that the systems that were in place don't function, are dysfunctional. So we have to come up with other solutions, and not just the ones in our nice cities, but also in other parts of the world that are even more under threat because of climate change and other economic systems.
Right. You recently published a book called The Internet is Stuk, The Internet is Broken. Well, what is broken according to you, and can we fix it?
Well, the subtitle is, but we can fix it. So again, I believe in possibilities. It's broken because our trust is broken in the internet. The way social media is manipulating us, the way that all kind of technology is surveilling us. The technology is a definition also of power, and technology in the hands of the wrong powers are actually killing the democratic principles of which also can be seen in technology. So it's really, technology is not neutral. And so what I try to describe in the book is to understand how it's not neutral. And then again, also try to figure out together how we can give it another direction.
Even in the face of the corona crisis, the themes that you are describing are even more relevant. Can you explain to us why?
Well, there is this idea that people think that if you have a problem, you just throw technology to it and then you will solve the problem. So this is an idea that technology in itself is not problematic. And if at the early beginnings of the crisis, of the corona crisis, there was this positioning, and still, that with an app we can sort of solve the problem, because then we know who is infected, and we can automatically trace and track the persons.
Quite successful in South Korea, I believe.
Yeah, well, and most of the systems don't work, because we don't need this kind of technology. We need people to help each other. We need social intelligence. So this was my statement from the early beginnings. But also, in a way, they try to implement the technology. In some countries, they still do. They collect so much information and put it on a centralized place that it's that in itself is a threat to privacy. So the first statement was that you don't have to trade privacy for technology. So luckily, people came up with other protocols and other technology which would ensure privacy by design. But still, I doubt the reason for this app. I still believe the apps that people want to implement, the tracing and tracking apps, are not the answer to our question.
Because, like you started with in the beginning, technology is not neutral and can be used for other purposes than the suggestion would give.
Well, the type of technologies that are being implemented at the moment can threaten privacy and sovereignty, and are basically taking control over our lives. And I think if we want to deal with this threat of corona and viruses, we have to find ways that we have social intelligence to deal with it, and not give this kind of technologies in the hands of government. So in the UK, these are all the wrong companies that are now getting the contracts of the government, like Palantir and Google and so on. In the Netherlands, it's slightly better. It's open source. It's an interesting group of people that are building the app at the moment. I believe they made the right choices about a protocol and how they want to preserve privacy, but I'm still not convinced that we need this automatic tracing.
Right, and there's this age-old argument, reasoning that says, well, I have nothing to hide. What's your reaction to that? Because it's been used very often in the past. I have nothing to hide, so if they can collect my data if they want.
Yeah, I think it's a false trade-off. I think you don't have to reveal where you have been, and to reveal and to trade your privacy and sovereignty in order to use technology. So we can make secure technology. This is also the position that we are in. So we are not against always technology. I mean, it's not like we think technology in itself is wrong. The way it's being designed and implemented, and the way they define who is in control, mostly is wrong.
Right. You've prepared a presentation.
Yes.
And later on, you will be joined by Sander van der Waal, right?
Yes, my colleague from the Waag, who is the lead of the Future Lab.
Great. Well, in that case, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So Sander will join me later on, but I will first start with the roadmap for the digital future. It has been a project which was on its way for a few years. We started 2 years ago at WeMakeThe.City. We had a big conference on a boat, which was the public stack boat. And we invited all kind of people from like privacy organizations, engineers, hackers, activists, designers, to think along how could we sort of repair the internet? How could we get our trust back in the technology? So we set up this first ideas about the public stack. But at the beginning of this year, we were in a situation that we were asked by our parliament, the House of Representatives in the Netherlands, to help them to make a roadmap for the digital future. So we took that up, and we used a lot of the research of the last 2 years to put it in this roadmap. And it's the image of this iceberg. So mostly we see only the citizen's perspective. So we have this idea like a nice app, and just use it like the Corona app. Don't ask any questions. Just trust it. But this trust, of course, is less and less. We trust these technologies not anymore. So we have to think about what's happening underneath the surface of these technologies. And then we come, first of all, there's a whole technology stack. There's all kind of layers of technology. It's not just the application, it's also your phone, the hardware, the protocols, the infrastructure. If you think about 5G, it's also the hardware that's being used and the backdoors that probably are in these systems. So this technological stack is not just the application that you're downloading and installing on your app, or the doorbell that is on your house that you use. So underneath the stack, there is a design process. And this design process has a lot of implications. It's like the question is, who is part of the design process? Who are there to define what this technology will mean? And underneath this design process is the foundation that implements a lot of the trajectory that the technology will work. So let's start with the foundation. There are always a lot of assumptions. And I think the first we have to tackle are these assumptions. The assumptions that technology will always work and have no downsides. That technology is an instrument of power. So if you want to have artificial intelligence and invest in it, it's a big difference if you give this a few billion euros to or dollars to the companies or to the people, the workers. So they would totally give another direction to what they want to do with the money and what they want to do with the artificial intelligence. So where are we optimizing for is a very clear, a very essential question. The second part of it is, of course, fundamental rights and values. And in what way are these in part of the process? So not just at the end, that you first develop the technology and then ask the question, but it should be part of the foundation, should be part of the process. So human rights are guaranteed and public values are respected by design in the process. Another question that we definitely have to resolve before we bring the technology to the front and bring it in the hands of the users is, how are we going to govern it? And what is the supervision? Well, if we say here society should keep a grip on the digitalization, it's definitely not the case at the moment. So we have to rethink how we have the governance in place before we're going to implement it. So how are the organizations accountable? Who is in charge? What is the supervision? And in what way can we also implement the supervision? And the third element, which is part of the foundation, are the socio-economic considerations. At the moment, if we talk about surveillance and the way that the big tech companies from the Silicon Valley operate, they make a business case of data. So surveillance is a business case. If we want to get another grip on the technology, we have to come up with another idea about what is value and how to create business models that are not based on surveillance and on disrupting our privacy. And the last important part, if we take all these four considerations in place, then the design process should be a much more inclusive process. And maybe, Sander, it's a nice moment to enter, because if we have this if we would have this in order, you would have an inclusive process, and people would be part of the process before the technology is entering the space. I want to give the hand now to you, because you will go further in what the public stack means for us.
Thanks very much, Marleen. So yes, once we have this process in place and we ensure that everyone's involved in the process, that human rights are respected, that society as a whole is able to get a grip on the technology, we can use this process to look at technology itself. And as Marleen already explained a little bit at the beginning, technology can be sort of opened up. If we open up the black box of technology, there are lots of different layers that we can distinguish. And this is what we call the public stack. And I will take you through it because it looks quite daunting if you see this for the first time. But it's actually quite intuitive. At the top, we have this application layer. We have the way in which people interact with technology on a day-to-day basis. They have apps on their phone. You have applications running on your laptop. And what we're saying is part of this process of ensuring the design process is right. That means that applications, for example, can be open source so that anyone can check what the source code is. What is it that you're running on your phone, that you're running on your computer? Can you trust it and can you build on it yourself? Then if you go one level down into the stack, there's the operating system. It's the Android, for example, on your phone, or Windows on your computer, or Linux on the server. And it's important for people to understand that they should be able to control and adapt the operating systems on their devices. And as Marleen said, it referred to the doorbell, for example, earlier. There are ways in which we're using technology that we actually don't really know what is running on these devices. But when we have an inclusive process, we want to make sure that we understand what is running on our devices. Now, one level below in the public stack is the Firmware and Drivers section, which is the software that's embedded on our devices. We don't really know it's there. Sometimes you can change it. That's what drivers are. Sometimes you can't, and that's what firmware is. It's embedded on your device. And sometimes you can change this, but sometimes you're not allowed to change it. So, for example, when you have a game controller, the game controller manufacturer is trying to prevent people from making changes. Even though it's possible to make changes, they try and prevent you from having that kind of control over your own device and what's running on it. So if we have this inclusive design process, we say if you own a device, you should have the right to change the drivers on this and flash the firmware as well. Then on the next level, there's the equipment, the devices that we use day to day. And with this trend of Internet of Things, which has been going on for a while, increasingly different devices have been connected to the internet and now can talk to anyone and everyone around the world. And what is important is that we understand what's going on in these devices, that these are not black boxes, but that we know what's running on these different levels on top of them. And you know, when you think about taking into account the boundaries of the planet and humanity, there are also aspects sort of understanding where the device comes from. What kind of minerals are embedded on this? There's an example project called Fairphone, which is a smartphone which actually did this job of sort of figuring out where all the resources come from and try and make sure that the minerals that are mined are actually mined from a place where people treat workers with the right frameworks, etc. So we need to understand a lot more about where the devices come from that we use day to day. And then finally, there's the infrastructural layer. So when your device is connected to the internet, there are lots of communication happening, some of which you know about, but some of which you may not be aware of. The fact that some people can look through your own camera on your doorbell, for example, because they hack the system, is something that people may not be aware of or even familiar that is possible. But also sort of all the cables facilitating the internet that we use day to day and the data centers that run at the background and make all of this cloud access possible, as well as the GPS satellites that ensure that we know our position very well when we move around in the city, are part of this infrastructure. And as the internet is increasingly proven, especially in these corona times, proven to be a public utility, it should also be governed accordingly. At the moment, there's a lot of private influence over what happens within the development of this infrastructure. So accountability is something that's really lacking at this aspect, and we need to change that as well. So these are the layers of the public stack, but you can see there's some context layers around it as well, which I'll go through now. Because what runs across all of these layers are data and algorithms feeding off and to that data. What is important about this data? It is different things. It's personal data from people individually. It's data about the data, which we call metadata. And some of this data is openly shared and other data is privately owned. But what we think is important is that people should have control over data and the algorithms that concern them, so that we have the people at the center of the process. The next contextual layer is protocols and standards. Standards define how interaction between these different layers take place. And these standards should be open as well, so we understand how one application is talking to another, or how it relates to the infrastructure on which it runs. And if we do that, then we can guarantee open ecosystems, and that we can ensure also the accountability that Marleen mentioned earlier. The next one is the security layer. With sort of the increase in connectivity, we also need to increase the level of cybersecurity, so make sure that the technology is secure so that we can rely on it safely and that we know it will not break down. And then finally, we move sort of to the outer layer of the public stack, and we come back to the perspective of the citizen almost, because what we do day to day is we make use of a service. And when we make use of a service, for example, Google Maps or Spotify or something like that, we should be able to look inside this black box, and we give a sort of blueprint of the different layers that you can imagine that this technology is built up of. And we need to sort of better understand how all of these layers are implemented and make sure that we choose implementations that put people a lot more to the center. So finally, we get back up from the center of the iceberg, and we get back to this citizen perspective using the technology. But now we sort of understand a bit better what the different layers are that make up this technology. We understand a bit more about the design process that is used to develop the technology. And we've defined a foundation through which we say we should develop technology. And we should use a design process where everyone's involved and where technology is designed with this perspective of society in mind. And this is also sort of needs a lot of work, right? We're not there yet. This public stack is not fully in place right now, but this is the call to action that we want to put out. And we want to make sure that citizens have the possibility and opportunity to grasp these concepts, because it is quite complex. So there's a lot of education and awareness raising needed in order to make sure that this all happens and that we actually move towards this public stack. So let me wrap up the presentation here, and we can go to the next section.
Thank you so much. If you could join me again, Marleen, here on stage. For us common people, it's quite dense and it's quite complicated in order to know what we should use to make to have a well-balanced opinion about what to participate as well. Because in England, for example, it was called a civic duty to download the app on your phone and to participate in the battle against COVID-19. When that call is being made, it's very difficult to also be aware of what you mentioned in the presentation. How should we go about that?
Well, I think what we see in the Netherlands is quite interesting, is that there is an open debates on a Slack channel of public, what's it called? Code for NL, which is a group of 1,000 people with a lot of coming from all kind of different backgrounds. So if we think about how we could collaborate together, society can be activated and can be part of the debate, and can also have influence on the choices to be made.
But you have to.
So I'm not saying that every individual should be part of every layer which is here, but if we collectively say that we think it's important to have technology that we can trust, and that is in line with our democracy and in line with public principles, then I think in general people should be more aware what's in the black box. And this is how we try to explain it a bit more, because otherwise people just feel totally out of touch. And then on each of these levels, different people can be activated and can help to set up the right structure for it.
But there's a duty almost for citizens to inform themselves, to be involved in developments and to be involved in the ways apps are being used and developed for their own use and what their own function in it is. But that information is not very easily accessible, or should I say understandable, because even the House of Representatives, it's very special that you were asked to collaborate with them, but even our leaders or political leaders do not really understand what the consequences are, or do they?
Well, more and more. So I think at the moment you see that even also in the second chamber, our representatives, they acknowledge that they don't know enough. So that's the first step, to acknowledge that you should know it, but it's very difficult to get the knowledge. So they also have an advice that they want to have a permanent commission on digital future. So that is already a first step. I think in cities like Amsterdam, but also Barcelona and other places, you see that cities are becoming really aware, and that people in the cities are also the civil servants feel that they have a responsibility, that they are fighting back, they are sort of reclaiming the public domain, reclaiming public values in technology. So there are more and more people from different professions. In education, for example, it's very strange that schools push their students into the hands of Google, whereas they should create safe spaces for their students.
But for people who are not informed, what's the danger of steering your children towards Google?
Well, at the moment, Google, in my view, but I'm not alone in this. There's no accountability. They share all data with other organizations or within their own multiple company structure that they have. They're moving into all kind of other areas like healthcare and a lot of other areas that they should not be in the first place. But because of the data, they build up a huge position, a power position. So you don't want to put your under 18. I mean, after that, it's your own choice. But you should not make that unavoidable. That you have to use technologies of companies that are actually part of the surveillance capitalist model.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because just this week I had a conversation with an 11-year-old talking about the dangers of the internet and the dangers of, handing over your personal data. But it was really difficult because there was not an understanding what's so bad in using Google or TikTok or telling everybody what your age is and giving them the personal information. So that education should start in school.
Yes, but there are all kind of different levels. Of course, this should be part of our normal education. Technology has a lot of influence and is shaping our society, even as also a law. So we're also obliged to understand the law. We also learn how to deal with politics and understanding how democracy functions. So we do have to understand how technology functions, because otherwise you don't know how democracy functions. But on the other hand, I also believe...
like the combination between technology and democracy, and again, the statement that you made earlier, where you said technology is not neutral, I think that understanding is not aware, not everybody's aware of that.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true.
What should we do to raise that awareness?
But I want to answer it in two ways. One is we should have maker education or critical thinking or critical technology as part of our curriculum. As early on having computational skills, not that everybody has to become a programmer. Not because it's human capital, because a lot of part of that coding stuff is part of like the human capital agenda, so that everybody will have a job. But actually to be an informed citizen. So therefore it should be part of more general art, science, technology, and environmental understanding. On the other hand, I also believe that as with food safety, you don't have to understand all the processes of how food is being produced, but we have our institutions secure food safety. So I also believe that internet safety is not something that every individual should check and have to deal with. It's something that we, as a society, we have to be sure that these technologies are safe, as we do with pharmacy, as we do with cars, as we do with all the products that we use. So it's very, very strange that we don't have this safeguarding of technology. It's really, really weird that the last 25 years we just let it go.
Isn't it too late already? Because on the systems that we've built up until now, and the companies that build those systems and use our data, aren't they already too powerful to turn back the time or turn back the system?
Of course, they're tremendously powerful, but we can also make decisions. I mean, we still have position to say we are going to build our own technologies. This is not all rocket science. It's not all very, very difficult. So we have very good examples of Signal, which is a messenger that doesn't share any information. We have the browser Brave,
But
which is
still,
really
even
working really
Signal
well.
and Brave, I do use them, but they're not as popular as WhatsApp or Google. And there's this lack of, the tipping point. It's successful if a lot of people are using it, but not enough people are using it. And now it's a hassle to have like 3 apps that you can, send messages with. So how can we turn that around?
Well, there are several perspectives. First, I'm really happy that they are there and they are growing and getting better and bigger and bigger. So therefore, when you would ask me that question 2 years ago, I couldn't point at them. They would not be there, or they would be there and really small. They're really gaining traction. And at the moment, like we also discover with conference calls and conference video conference calls and software, that certain technologies are not being used by companies or governments. So it becomes there is an awareness, so that people make deliberate choices. So this is the first step, that we are aware of it and we make choices. I do see, I'm one of the users of Signal for the first, and it was very difficult to get my family and people from school groups and so on. But it also attracting more and more people, so it will also take some time. But we need really well-designed alternatives, and we have to spend the money well. So
Is there enough money to design that?
Sorry?
Is there enough money to design those new, more democratic systems? Is there enough money to develop those?
Well, we spend a lot of money on ICT at the moment, especially there's a lot of money coming from public organizations being spent to the classical companies. So if we would spend that money differently, if we would use it in procurement, if we would say this kind of what we just said, the stack, if we say these are the principles, and if you align with these principles, you will get your money. But if you don't align, we will go to another vendor. And we don't want to be vendor locked in as we are now. So that's in the first place. So if that would be make a tremendous difference. And then if we would spend our research money, our innovation money, so we have to spend billions of euros on artificial intelligence. If we say, well, you will get your money on the research, but the technology should be open, should be commons-based, should not be proprietary technology of companies. So we're not going to steer on patents and intellectual property. We're going to say this kind of... So Europe has a real good position to do this. And there is a whole next generation internet program, which could really be the big difference in spending our money well and using public money to build a public internet.
Right. You've developed the routekaart digitale toekomst, a route map digital future. How are we going to use that in the next couple of years?
Well, hopefully it will help the representatives to ask the right questions. And I think it starts also to ask the right questions. So we only gave a little overview, but we gave a lot of munition to people. So make it so that it becomes a political debate. So that from awareness you start to make the difference. To us, from WAAG, we believe it's very important to have a critical position. And critical means that you're not against it, or it's not pro or con. It's being precise. What you actually pursue. And if you define what you pursue, you can say, well, then these are the rules. Mm-hmm. But it has to become much more, the way that we describe it as a process is saying we have to discuss and define the fundamentals. Yeah. And if we know that these are the fundamental position, then, and I think this is the most important part, we can enter this design process in a good manner. Yeah. Which means that it has to be much more inclusive, much more diverse. Mm-hmm. This is the discussion that we're all in at the moment. Yeah. If you're not on the table, you can't have influence on the outcome. Yeah. So this whole design process around technology should be more inclusive. Society should be on the table. Should not be just the user at the end of the process. Right. And hopefully, by doing these steps and spending our money well and defining it also in another economic environment, this whole movement for the next generation internet and a public internet is part of the commons movement. It's part of the 21st century economics, where you move away from extractive economic models and move towards regenerative models. So I think it's also part of a much bigger movement, totally in line also with the sustainable developments.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that, because in this series we're only at episode 7, but every edition there was this need of diversity and inclusivity mentioned on all different kinds of levels to include more voices, to have a more democratic and a fairer system, and we can develop that in future. On to our next topic, because originally, and we announced that as well, we invited Bianca Wylie as well. Through personal circumstances, she's not able to participate in this program, but you invited her. Could you explain us why you invited her especially?
Well, Bianca is a big inspiration for me. There was this, I think we have some footage about it. There was this idea in Toronto, she lives in Toronto, that it would be like the playground for smart cities. So they would implement all the beautiful, nice stuff, and Google would do that. So the city government gave Google the floor. Here you have a whole part of the city, and Bianca was the first, and she was really she was the citizen who stood up and said, "This is not possible. You can't just give a company. You can privatize the city," and so she has done a lot of work over the last few years. And in the end, she's successful because Sidewalks, the part of Google that was in charge, they stepped down, and they. So I was really curious. I wanted to ask her, "How do you feel? Do you feel that you conquer?" I mean, this was part of the good news. There's a lot of bad news about technology. To me, this was good news.
But the reason why Google withdrew from Toronto was explained by them as, it's because of the corona crisis. But in reality, it's because of the involvement of Bianca and getting people more aware about the consequences it had if Toronto gave a piece of land to Google to develop in their own means.
Yeah, it is Bianca and the whole movement there that started. So the citizens pushed back on the idea that everything could be tracked and every part of the city would be based on data and algorithms. I think they made a very good. There was a very good activist movement, but also this was also how people started to understand what was behind this nice surface of application. So it's definitely they were in a position to dive deeper underneath the surface and discuss the fundamentals and the principles.
Yes. We've got a short clip that introduces this, so let's have a look at the clip.
Here's the plan. It's big. It's really big. It's about 1,500 pages long, and it describes a vision for the eastern waterfront that goes way beyond just Quayside. In addition to the 5 hectares of land right here that Sidewalk Labs wants to develop, they also want to build on additional land over to the east. They want to put Google's Canadian headquarters there as the heart of a new commercial district and something they're calling the Idea District, which will be much, much larger and will follow the same blueprint for innovation as here in Quayside. So, what does this plan actually describe? Basically, Sidewalk Toronto wants to test out a whole bunch of different urban innovations. They want to do stuff with modular pavement so you can do more flexible streetscapes. They want to build buildings in a different way so there's a lot more publicly usable space on the ground floors of these buildings. And they want to build this whole neighborhood out of this product called mass timber, which is this specially engineered form of wood. And in fact, if this project gets off the ground, some of the tallest mass timber buildings anywhere in the world will be built right here. So all of this has turned out to be really controversial. On the one hand, you've got a lot of people saying that this is exciting, this is exactly the sort of interesting, innovative project that Toronto needs. But there are also a lot of critics who say that this is a big land grab by Google. They say that you'd basically have a private corporation doing a lot of the functions that normally a municipal government would take on, and that kind of privatization is really scary. And we haven't even talked about the data yet. There's a whole other set of concerns that this is basically Google trying to get a foothold into the municipal infrastructure and scoop up a whole lot of data. Sidewalk Lab says that isn't the case. They say they don't want to profit from urban data at all, and they say they want it all to go to an independent third-party regulator to hold on to all the data and manage all of those issues. But the concerns are still there.
Yeah. Very interesting what happened there. reminds me of what Disney did a long time ago. They developed a village called Celebration as well, where they tried to control a whole village as well, and that wasn't successful either. So what's the need of companies in order to create the city according to their own rules or means?
Yeah, what's in the mind of these people? I think some generally would think they bring value to people, that they can help people. They have this beautiful rhetorics always. It will be safe, and it will be more wealthy, and people will be happy. You always see the happy parts of the, and also like the drawings are always looking really nice. But at the moment, if you look at the US, what's happening with the Palantirs and the Googles and how they are using these technologies, the same technologies, to surveil and to on the border and to make people with less ability to push them back in society. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's about control. In the end, it's all about control.
But again, to just reverse the point of view, what's bad about Google controlling that part of the city? Because with the technologies they have, maybe they could optimize, the way we live, and maybe there's a good thing to be had in the knowledge that they can bring to the city, just to change perspectives. What's the bad thing about it?
I hope it's a rhetoric question that I have to explain to you why it's not a good idea that Google is controlling our cities or any countries. Well, they're optimizing for their own profit. Mm. And they have shareholders that are unknown to us. They have processes that are opaque, so we have no clue who's making decisions. There is no accountability. There's no democratic oversight. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's a good idea actually to give our democracy in the hands of companies that are and then of course Google once said we don't want to do evil, or we don't do evil, and then they skipped it from their from the principles. So I think now they do want to do evil, and I'm not sure that they're not part of an evil empire at the moment. I'm really not sure.
Sander, thank you for joining us. Do you also think that Google is part of an evil empire?
It's a good question. I think they're a private company, so they have one goal, which is maximizing the profit for their shareholders. Whereas our land, our cities, our villages are public and should belong to the people. We've taken centuries to build up democratic institutions and democracies where people have a say over what happens in their environment. And to swap that out for a corporation which is maximizing profits for their shareholders, I think it's the wrong thing to do. So you could call that evil. I think they operate within certain circumstances and a certain dynamic which is contrary to public values.
Again, to change perspectives, could the Toronto case, could that not be used to have Google to be more accountable? So you can participate, you can have this piece of land, you can develop it, you can do whatever you want to, but you have to be accountable. Your accountability should increase. And that would force them in order to be more transparent, or that would force them in order to be more considerate of the systems that already have been built in the past hundreds of years, like you said, Sander. Would that be a possibility?
Well, I think that has been, over the last few years, they tried to negotiate with the citizens. So they set up, I think one of the people in charge from Sidewalks complained that he talked to thousands of citizens. And they still were not convinced that he was on the right. So yeah, I think it was, and it's also a very, I think it's not just negotiation, like maybe if we do it a little bit like this, or maybe we give the data to a trust. Still, the algorithms that are in place will define inclusion, exclusion, what can happen in the space. Right. So this is not an open public space anymore. This is a proprietary space. Yeah. And so I don't believe it's a way. It's not something you can pursue. It's not a way to go. And I think this is not something you should negotiate with corporate partners. It's so. I think, and what happened also in Toronto, and this is really a very big question for for democracy, is that they were lured into this idea that they would be like all these cities want to be shine with their innovation, shine with smart stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they forget that they have another responsibility in balancing technology to also the cost of technology.
Yeah.
And again, I think they were not knowledgeable enough to make the right decisions. And hopefully this knowledge is now in place.
We will talk a little bit more about how we can develop smart cities in a democratic way. But first, I would like to watch a clip from Bianca as well at a virtual design festival. Let's have a look at that.
In Toronto, when the sirens start to go, you know what everybody does? Do you do the same thing here? You all pull over? We know when there's an emergency, sometimes we all have to do the thing. We don't stop. We're not like, maybe it's not really an emergency. Actually, like, I don't know, what do you guys think? It's an emergency? We don't do that. We all act because we have a social norm. It's also, I don't even know if it's law. But it always is beautiful to me because in that moment, we together, people who don't know each other, decide that we're going to move out of the way to let the person who is struggling have a better chance. They might die. We need to do our thing. And this is just a tiny little story for me and a reminder that we know how to do that. We know how to act together. And my greatest fear as we face all of the things that we're facing together in 2019 is that we're forgetting that we have collective power. And so the reason I'm here today, and I will tie this to my work in Toronto, is because I think we are at a critical time to rebuild, empower, believe in, and trust our institutions. Primarily our governments, and particularly our city governments.
Collective power, that's the main theme that she introduced, and we saw the power of collective power as well. For example, in Minneapolis, where they just announced by the pressure of the protests that they are going to reform or restructure the police force. That collective power, we're not aware of that, right?
Yeah, and what is very interesting of the position of Bianca is that she also refers to trust in institutions. And it's very difficult when you're an activist and you're just your own government, like city government, sort of sold a part of the city to Google, and then to have to deal with both Google and your representatives to say we have to trust also our institutions.
Yeah.
But that does also mean that we have to rethink our institutions, that we have to re-engage with them. And this is, for example, why we also engage with our representatives of the Tweede Kamer, of the city, because if we can put them in our democracy in place, we need to have this oversight based on also elections and democracy. But and of course, if we collectively rethink and regain our trust in each other, we can come up with good solutions.
But is activism the only way to bring about a change? Because I've noticed in the past couple of months and even years, people are scared of being called an activist or are scared of activism. Is that the only way, or is there another way to have that collective power put in force?
Well, at the moment, I don't feel anymore as an activist because more and more people, it's more being a realist. I feel like we are very realistic about how things should pursue in the technology field. So you don't have to be an activist anymore, in my view. We just have to become designers. We have to step in. We have to take responsibility. We have to not just leave it to the people that we think will do it for us. So activism means more not being against something again. It's something to be to take your responsibility in helping to define the future.
Yeah.
And maybe, do you feel an activist at the moment?
Well, a little bit, but I think we're, you talked about makers earlier and doers. I mean, we are active, right? And I think activist is sort of a term that has sort of, changed its meaning over time. But I think what's important is that what we're trying to show through our work is that people are doing lots of really good things. Things are happening in society. People are developing collective actions. And this is part, we think, of how we should democratize technology and how technology should have a better place in how democracy is functioned. So we are working closely with governments, as Marleen says. We do believe that that institutions are part of the solution as well. So we don't place ourselves outside of those as much because we believe in democracy, right? So, but still, we are still active in that sense. I guess we're sort of an activist in that sense. Yes.
That you're active and that you pursue the right cause. But talking about trusting our institutions, we've got another clip and that needs a little bit of an introduction because Apple and Google have launched a contact tracing system called exposure notification, and that app could allow smartphone users and overwhelmed health officials to detect when a person has been exposed to the coronavirus. That's, those companies that are being involved in something that benefits the bigger cause. On the contrary, on the other side, in the UK, there's another app introduced by the NHS, a test and trace service that went live on May the 28th. And they had 25,000 contact tracing staff, and they have the capacity to trace 10,000 contacts a day. In short, they said, the only information we collect will be stored on your phone and will not be shared with anybody else. It just there was breaking news that the information, the data, was sold to Palantir, I believe. The California data mining startup founded by eccentric PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel. That's a case of not being able to trust your own institutions. We have a clip to introduce that as well.
It's a combination of false positives and false negatives combined with the potential uses for this technology that I have issue with. If it's one thing to generate the technology or use the technology to just generate alerts that help people to stay vigilant about monitoring their symptoms or perhaps get testing. But it's possible that when you walk into a store or your employer requests that before you're permitted back to work, that you show the results of these apps, that you essentially voluntarily use these apps and demonstrate that you were not infected. And I think that has some real danger.
Then there's a whole nother set of problems, which is, are people going to use this kind of data to troll?
For example, generate alerts so that people don't leave their house, maybe around election day, or essentially create denial of service attacks to make sure that the app isn't alerting in areas where there might actually be a kind of a pop-up or spike in infection.
Well, what happens if not that many people want to download an app? Even if you download an app to record a successful contact, the other person that you have contact with also has to download the app.
Technology can be really important, but it really has to be owned and managed by trusted partners in the community. And that's where really our public health folks come into play. Make sure you test it at the right levels of the public health system, including at the local level, to ensure that whatever you came up with, even if it was informed, really is practical in terms of implementing it.
I think that we're confronted here with this huge dilemma because I do believe that Google and Apple developed apps with the best intentions in order to battle COVID-19. But in execution, there's a misuse of data. And if it's not happening at the moment or at the conception of the app, it possibly happens later. But still, they've got the technology in order to develop those apps. How can you go about it? How can you, bring about that to them to share the knowledge and to secure privacy as well? Is it possible to work with commercial partners in that sense?
Sometimes, yes, if they would comply to some of the privacy by design principles, and one company wants, the other one doesn't really. So there's Palantir I would never trust. Apple tries their best. Google, I would not trust. So you can make distinctions between the companies, and also how. But as long as we can't really, they don't acknowledge. They're not under a public oversight. You never know. And there's this idea about function creep. The moment that you implement it in an application or in the operating system of a phone, it can also be used for other type of purposes. I think this is the main concern about what's happening now with the Bluetooth tracking and tracing systems that are being built in the hardware of the phone. Is that we don't know how to for other users it can be used as well. And at the moment, I believe there are some examples where people are, like in Canada, but they did contact tracing, but just by humans, by calling and just because it's also part of. You also need psychology. You need social intelligence to do so,
and responsibility.
Responsibility.
As well.
So the idea that just the app itself would do the job is not true. It's and people know already that it's not true. So everybody who's pushing the apps at the moment as the solution must have also other intentions, and these intentions are control over people, not control by people. And I think this is essentially the fight that we have.
But that's not only applicable to companies, but also applicable to certain kind of governments.
Yes, absolutely. So if we say we have to trust institutions, is that we have to rethink the institutions, and to democratize some of the institutions. But we need them. But at the moment, not all governments can be trusted in this.
We're entering the final stages of the program, and I think that we started that you're quite optimistic, but I've got the feeling that we've entered quite a pessimistic stage where we have to conclude that not all companies are to be trusted, but even not all governments are to be trusted. You developed that roadmap. Where do we have to go between now and 10 years? In what way can we ensure and secure that our privacy and our best intentions are being kept and put into practice?
Well, I don't know, Sander. Are we optimistic? I believe I think at the moment I'm more optimistic than a few years ago. Although so it's because the awareness is there, and we can start to talk about what we do want to design. I think within Europe, within some European cities, but also all over the world, some people from city governance are aware. And I believe that it's possible, but it will take some time. It's not something that can be done in a few years because we let it go for 25 years. So
but if you say it will take some time, I proposed a window of 10 years. Is that not enough time?
I would say 5 years, but if you have to make some progress in 5 years in order to be somewhere in 10 years.
Yeah. But that calls on a responsibility for us citizens as well to be more involved, more informed, and having our political representatives fighting the good cause.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I am also an optimist. I think progress is being made. It's great to see that the Dutch Parliament is considering their own role and make recommendations that they have to sort of understand much better what's at stake, and that they increase their level of knowledge and that they involve society at large. I think this is something that we all have to do together. So the awareness is growing. With the Corona app, they're trying to facilitate an open process, so they're more open about it than ever before. So I think there are some small sort of signs of hope that we're moving in the right direction, but there is, this roadmap is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and what we are hoping to do is to connect some of the initiatives that are taking place across society, and shine the light on them and connecting them and building these sort of new institutions, helping democratize existing institutions so that the technology is built more on these public values in society. Yeah.
Marleen, my final question for you, because when we're facing a crisis, everybody's willing to change. There's this momentum. How can we keep this momentum going, even when there's a vaccine and even when we're about to resume our, old ways of living again? How can we keep the momentum to keep it being informed, being active or activist in some ways? What should we do to secure that?
Well, I like the whole that in our current situation, different movements come together, different social movements come together. Movements coming from so reclaim economics, rethinking financial systems, financial commons, and so on. People coming from sustainable, from energy transition, from city makers, and to reclaim and to take responsibility for your environment, for the land, and also from the digital, from the technology point of view. And I think we all have the same cause. It's all about going away from extraction and taking care of our environment, taking care of our future together. And I think this is just, I think it's a very fruitful collaboration. And I believe we have so much to say to each other and to work on together. So we don't need a corona crisis. We already have a climate crisis. There's a lot of crises that we have. So I think we are very busy in the future, in the coming years. Yeah.
I would say thank you in a way, but knowing that we have to face more crises than we're facing right now is daunting as well. Thank you so much for now. Thank you, Sander. Thank you, Marleen, for sharing your insights. Unfortunately, this is the end of the program. I would like to invite you to check our website, because in this series there are more episodes coming. Marije Vogelsang will be one of our main guests, Kees Klomp and Eva Gladek as well. Please check the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger to be informed of all the live casts that we are doing. And if you would like to make a contribution in order to, in these difficult times, contribute to the programs that we make, please do so at www.dezwijger.nl/pay. There you can leave a contribution that will benefit the programs directly. Well, thank you so much for joining us now, and hope to see you next episode. Bye-bye.